I had just finished my freshman year of college and came home for the summer to a whole bunch of texts from a very unlikely friend of mine. In high school, we bonded over parties, a really frustrating math class, and his desire to open up to me about every bad thing he'd ever done because the rest of his friends were, well, I believe the medical term is douchebags. As far as I was aware, I knew him better than anyone else, yet we had nothing in common besides both knowing the exact number of times he'd cheated on his ex-girlfriend during senior week. All this to say, I was very surprised when he asked me out on a date. I think I was so taken aback that I replied with something like, sure. A few days before our date, he suggested I come over and watch Netflix with him. I saw right through that and made the counter proposal that we both invite a few more people and make it a small party. We played a drinking game that got me way too drunk, way too fast, and when I found myself alone with him, I kissed him. Luckily, I had taken precautions going into this evening to prevent myself from feeling sexy in any way. I felt I could easily and confidently make him wait till after a few dates before we visited the idea of having sex. I had on dorky underwear, I had put in a tampon, had untrimmed lady bits, the works. But somehow he made me feel really guilty for saying no. So, being the generous, benevolent gal I am, I offered a sensible blowjob as a compromise. While performing this procedure, if you will, I was sobering up enough to remember I didn't want to be doing any of it. I had just wanted to make out a little, maybe cuddle and talk, and make him earn my trust before things went any further. So I told him I was dizzy and needed to stop. He didn't say much, just continued to pleasure himself on the other side of the room while I sat feeling indescribably uncomfortable. When he was close to finishing, he grabbed a fistful of my hair and forced me down on him to swallow his semen. In that moment, I was the smallest I've ever felt in my life. The next thing I remember is waking up in a completely different area of the house, where the girls were supposed to be sleeping per his parents' request. I laughed about it with my best girlfriend who had been at the party, and she giggled and said ew at all the right places over breakfast that morning. When I got home, I realized I'd left something at the party, so I texted him and received uncharacteristically frosty replies. I asked him if something was wrong, and he said that we couldn't be doing anything like that again, and that I was a distraction from his career. He implied that I had thrown myself at him, and he was disgusted with me. I was so embarrassed and surprised that I actually began to see that night the way he was painting it. I hated myself for it. I went up to my room and cried and dug at myself until I was so full of self-loathing that I just assumed the earth would open up and swallow me at any moment. I made a decision. I ripped a piece of notebook paper out and I wrote a letter to myself. In the letter, I made 10 promises to myself towards improving my well-being. It took me months to be able to recall events as they had actually taken place, longer to be able to tell anyone about it, and longer still to begin to believe it wasn't my fault. I will work on those promises to myself for the rest of my life in spite of what happened. And most of all, in order to keep healing, I will let myself be loved the way I want and deserve to be. I will fight for my happiness.